Welcome, focused learners. I am absolutely thrilled to share today's explainer with you. We're taking a structured, deep look at a total cultural obsession, Dracula. But we're not just rehashing a spooky campfire story about some monster in a castle. No, we are peeling back the layers to look at the dark psychology behind the monster.
Now, I want you to think about this for a second. What if the most terrifying monster in all of literature was never really about the blood? What if, instead, Dracula actually represented something much, much darker, something hidden deep inside our own human psychology?
To really get the monster, we first have to understand the world that built him. Back in 1897, Europe was going through some rapid, frankly unsettling changes. On the surface, sure, society looked perfectly civilized, super polished, very polite. But right underneath that pristine, civilized veneer, these massive anxieties were bubbling up. People were absolutely terrified of disease, the influx of immigration, rising crime rates, and what they basically saw as a total moral collapse. Their rigid society was literally cracking at the seams, and right into that perfect storm of cultural panic steps Dracula. He's this outsider who is mysterious, foreign, incredibly intelligent, seductive, and of course highly dangerous. He doesn't just attack people in dark alleys, he invades their homes, controls their minds, and spreads corruption almost like a virus.
And this brilliantly illustrates the exact conflict at the heart of the story. On one side, you've got civilized society, completely driven by logic, strict order, and deeply, deeply suppressed emotions. People were trying so incredibly hard to maintain boundaries. But then, on the flip side, we have Dracula's chaos. He is all about savagery, absolute freedom from the rules, and immortality. He's constantly shattering the boundaries between life and death, civilization and savagery. Psychologically speaking, Dracula represents society's absolute terror of just losing control. He isn't just a basic evil villain. He is the walking, breathing embodiment of the hidden chaos that we humans try so hard to suppress.
Why do we consume these dark stories in the first place? Well, it's because fiction acts as a safe space for dangerous emotions. We're naturally drawn toward fictional darkness because it lets us experience the thrill of fear, the pull of obsession, and that rush of rebellion, but entirely without any real-world consequences. This is the absolute secret to why vampire stories have stayed so incredibly popular. They give audiences a way to safely explore forbidden emotions. So Dracula becomes way more than a monster. He transforms into this powerful fantasy of escape.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it breaks down this psychological tension. This happens when a mortal threat doesn't look like a hideous monster, but rather a charming aristocrat. Dracula relies on a chilling anatomy of fear. Unlike your traditional movie monster that just jumps out of the shadows to scare you, his horror comes from highly methodical, sophisticated manipulation. Look at the steps. First, he enters minds slowly. Second, he influences emotions. Third, he actually manages to gain trust. And then, finally, step 4, he destroys his victims psychologically. He speaks calmly, he dresses elegantly, he comes across as highly intelligent. And this completely scrambles the human brain. We are naturally very uncomfortable with threats that seem attractive or trustworthy. By weaponizing that trust, Dracula makes the horror feel disturbingly, terrifyingly human.
So the crucial point is how this touches on humanity's oldest, deepest conflict. Just sit with this for a moment. Would immortality truly be a gift or a nightmare? At its very core, Dracula represents our profound obsession with death. We are terrified of dying, and yet we dream endlessly about immortality. Dracula is the embodiment of both of those things at once. He is immortal, powerful, eternal, but he is also cursed. He survives forever, sure, but he loses his humanity in the process. And this creates a fascinating psychological paradox for us as viewers. We desire eternal life, but we are deeply, deeply afraid of what we might become if we have to trade away our morality, our emotions, and our true identity just to get it.
We've talked a lot about the Victorians, but why, more than 100 years later, does this story still survive and thrive in modern pop culture? Well, it is highly engineered. Notice this meta-nod from the source material, which is actually a modern media guide. It actively instructs modern creators on how to visually construct psychological dread today. They pair specific timeframes with visual cues like Victorian London imagery, elegant vampires, and ticking clocks symbolizing immortality. It just goes to show that the atmospheric dread of Dracula is no accident. Filmmakers and storytellers are literally still using these specific visual tools to trigger the exact same psychological responses today that Bram Stoker triggered way back in 1897.
And honestly, those visual cues still work perfectly.
Because human psychology fundamentally hasn't changed. We still fear losing control. We still constantly struggle with temptation. We romanticize danger, and we still wonder what darkness is lurking inside ourselves.
The next time you watch Dracula in a movie or pick up a vampire story, just remember this. The vampire isn't frightening because he drinks blood. He's frightening because he reveals the darkness we humans try hardest to hide. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep seeking those structured answers, and I hope this leaves you with plenty to think about. Until next time.